Deep Space Nine gave us war, loss, betrayal, and some of the most emotional moments in Star Trek history. But the real tragedy came after the cameras stopped rolling. One actor battled PTSD after a horrifying real-life attack, while several beloved stars later died from devastating illnesses. Here is what happened to them after the series ended. Aaron Eisenberg as Nog. Nobody expected Nog to become one of the bravest characters in Deep Space Nine. When Aaron Eisenberg joined the show in 1993 at just 24 years old, Nog was introduced as a mischievous Ferengi kid chasing trouble around the station. But over time, the character transformed into the first Ferengi in Starfleet, and much of that emotional journey came from Aaron's real-life struggle to survive against impossible odds. Aaron's life was filled with pain long before Hollywood found him. He was born with only one partially functioning kidney, and the illness permanently affected his growth, leaving him much smaller than other actors. By age 14, he had already undergone a kidney transplant after years of hospitals, treatments, and exhaustion. Even after becoming famous through DS9, his career slowed dramatically because casting directors often focused more on his appearance than his talent. There were also periods where money became difficult, forcing him to work as a professional photographer while quietly continuing his health battle. The saddest twist came near the end of his life, just as things finally seemed to improve. In late 2018, Aaron married Melissa Longo after finding happiness again following years of health problems and personal struggles. He also returned to the Star Trek world through podcasts and fan events, reconnecting with audiences who had never forgotten Nog. But behind the smiles, his kidneys were failing again. After another transplant and years of complications, his body was simply exhausted from decades of fighting to stay alive. Aaron Eisenberg passed away on September 21, 2019, at the age of 50. He left behind his wife, 2 sons, and one of the most inspiring character arcs in Star Trek history. In 2026, his legacy continues to grow. With the USS Nog and even an asteroid named in his honor, a touching reminder that the boy once underestimated by everyone became unforgettable to millions of fans. René Auberjonois as Odo rarely smiled, and somehow that made him one of the most human characters on Deep Space Nine. René Auberjonois was 53 years old when he first appeared in 1993, buried beneath layers of heavy prosthetic makeup that turned the shape-shifting security chief into a lonely outsider, searching for where he truly belonged. Odo's quiet pain, his impossible romance with Kira, and his constant battle between justice and emotion slowly made him the emotional center of the station. Away from the cameras, René carried his own quiet frustrations. Even though he came from a prestigious family tied to artists and French royalty, he spent years trying to escape the pressure of living in their shadow. His marriage to Judith Mahaly remained strong for decades, but the physical strain of playing Odo became exhausting. Sitting 4 to 5 hours a day in thick silicone makeup left him isolated from the cast and struggling with skin irritation and claustrophobic discomfort during much of the series. In his later years, René slowly stepped away from Hollywood's spotlight and found unexpected peace through voice acting and smaller projects. Fans were thrilled when he returned to voice Odo again for Star Trek Online in 2018, but behind the scenes, his health was already collapsing. That same year, he quietly began chemotherapy for lung cancer, and by 2019, the disease had spread to his brain. Rather than undergo treatments that could destroy his memory and personality, he made the heartbreaking decision to spend his final days at home with family, listening to music and looking through old photographs. René Auberjonois passed away on December 8, 2019, at the age of 79 from metastatic lung cancer. He left behind his wife of more than 50 years, 2 children, and one of the most unforgettable performances in Star Trek history. Even in 2026, fans still describe Odo as the soul of Deep Space Nine, proof that beneath all the makeup, René gave the character something painfully real. Louise Fletcher as Winn Adami. Winn always sounded calm right before she destroyed someone's trust, and Louise Fletcher played that quiet cruelty so perfectly. At 59 years old, Fletcher turned the Bajoran spiritual leader into a smiling manipulator whose hunger for power slowly poisoned everyone around her. The way she softly called people "my child" became more unsettling than any scream or threat ever could. Off-screen, Louise's life was shaped by loneliness long before Hollywood found her. Both of her parents were deaf, forcing her to grow up translating the world for them while learning speech from an aunt in Texas. Her marriage to producer Jerry Bick eventually collapsed in a bitter 1977 divorce after years of tension and career pressure. Even worse, she stepped away from acting for more than a decade to raise her children, and when she returned to Hollywood, many believed her career was already over. Instead, she shocked the industry by becoming immortal as Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In her later years, Louise slowly disappeared from the spotlight and embraced a quieter life far away from Hollywood chaos. Her final screen appearance came in Netflix's Girl Boss in 2017. During her last years in France, she became increasingly private and rarely appeared publicly, choosing peace and distance from the industry that had defined most of her life. Louise Fletcher passed away on September 23, 2022, at the age of 88 at her home in Mont-de-Rosse, France. She died of natural causes and left behind 2 sons and a legacy that permanently changed Hollywood villains forever. Many Star Trek fans still say nobody could make the words "my child" sound more frightening than Louise Fletcher. Majel Barrett as Lwaxana Troi and voice of computer Lwaxana. Troi never entered a room quietly. She flirted, teased, embarrassed Captain Picard, and somehow stole every scene within seconds. When Majel Barrett began appearing on Deep Space Nine at 61 years old, audiences already knew her voice better than her face, because she had spent decades guiding Federation starships as the legendary Star Trek computer voice. Beneath all of Lwaxana's dramatic energy was one of the most important women the franchise ever had. Majel's life was filled with both privilege and pressure after marrying Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry in 1969. Their relationship was surrounded by controversy from the beginning, especially because Gene was still entangled in his previous marriage when they first wed. After his death in 1991, Majel suddenly found herself carrying the enormous burden of protecting the Star Trek empire almost alone. She faced constant pressure from studios, fans, and business disputes, while also struggling with the painful reality that Hollywood often saw her only as the wife of Gene Roddenberry, rather than an actress with her own identity. The final years of her life became increasingly emotional as she tried to preserve Gene's vision while her own health quietly declined. Even shortly before her death, she continued recording the famous Star Trek computer voice for future projects, determined to keep the franchise connected to its roots. One of the most touching twists came years later in 2024, when a portion of Majel and Gene Roddenberry's ashes were finally launched into deep space together aboard Celestis's Enterprise flight, fulfilling a dream tied to Star Trek itself decades after their deaths. Majel Barrett passed away on December 18, 2008, at the age of 76 from leukemia at her home in Bel Air, Los Angeles. She left behind her son Rod Roddenberry, a fortune estimated above $60 million, and a voice permanently woven into science fiction history. Today, she is still remembered as the true First Lady of Star Trek, the woman whose voice continued guiding starships long after she was gone. Brock Peters as Joseph Sisko. Joseph Sisko always felt like the kind of father who could calm an entire room just by talking over dinner. Brock Peters was already 68 years old when he began playing Benjamin Sisko's wise and stubborn father on Deep Space Nine. His scenes never needed action or explosions because his voice alone carried the weight of experience, wisdom, and heartbreak. Long before Star Trek, Brock Peters had already spent years fighting against the limits Hollywood placed on black actors. He refused to accept shallow stereotypes and pushed for roles with real emotional depth instead of servants or criminals. That decision made his career far more difficult, especially during the 1950s and 60s. Even after earning praise for To Kill a Mockingbird, he still faced racism inside the industry and backlash for taking politically sensitive roles connected to civil rights and racial injustice. Behind the success was also personal grief. His wife, Dolores Daniels, died in 1989 after nearly 3 decades of marriage, leaving Peters carrying that loss quietly through his later years. As he grew older, Peters slowly became one of Hollywood's respected elder statesmen, balancing acting with humanitarian and community work. He kept appearing in smaller television roles while also remaining deeply connected to theater and social activism. But by 2005, his health had begun seriously declining. Just months before his death, he made one final television appearance on JAG. Brock Peters passed away on August 23, 2005, at the age of 78 from pancreatic cancer in Los Angeles. He left behind a daughter, a Hollywood Walk of Fame star, and a legacy worth far more than his estimated $2 million fortune. Now, many Star Trek fans still see Joseph Sisko as the emotional heart of Deep Space Nine. James Darren as Vic Fontaine. Vic Fontaine could turn a hologram lounge into the coolest place in the galaxy with nothing more than a smooth song and a quiet piece of advice. James Darren was 62 years old when he joined Deep Space Nine in 1998 as the holographic nightclub singer Vic Fontaine, a role that unexpectedly revived both his acting and music career decades after his teen idol fame had faded. Behind the confidence and polished image, Darren spent years struggling with the darker side of fame. During the height of his teen idol years in the late 1950s and early 60s, studios and record labels pushed him relentlessly, turning him into a commercial product almost overnight. The pressure left him emotionally exhausted, and as younger stars replaced him, his movie career slowed down dramatically. His first marriage to Gloria Terlitsky also collapsed under stress and outside pressure surrounding their interfaith relationship, ending in divorce after only a few years. That began to change again near the end of the 1990s. Deep Space Nine unexpectedly revived both his acting and singing career, inspiring him to record new music albums decades after his original fame had faded. In his later years, he stayed closely connected to fans through conventions and interviews, embracing the nostalgia that once haunted him. But in 2024, news about his declining heart condition became increasingly serious after complications involving his aortic valve left doctors unable to safely perform surgery. James Darren passed away peacefully in his sleep on September 2, 2024, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He died from congestive heart failure at the age of 88 and left behind his wife, Evie Norland, 3 sons, and a career that stretched across music, film, and television. Even in 2026, many Deep Space Nine fans still return to Vic Fontaine's lounge whenever they want to remember the softer, more hopeful side of Star Trek. Tony Todd as Jake Sisko. Adult. Jake Sisko spent most of The Visitor carrying grief in his eyes, and Tony Todd made that pain feel devastatingly real from the moment he appeared on screen. At 41 years old, Todd played the older version of Jake, trapped in a lifetime of loss after watching his father disappear in front of him. Even though he appeared in only one major episode, many fans still consider it the greatest performance in the entire series. Behind that powerful voice and towering screen presence was a life filled with isolation and frustration. Tony Todd grew up largely under the care of his grandmother while struggling with the emotional distance inside his family life, and acting became his escape long before Hollywood noticed him. After Candyman turned him into a horror icon in 1992, the success became both a blessing and a trap. Directors constantly pushed him toward frightening villains and supernatural monsters, while his dramatic acting abilities were often overlooked. For years, he quietly carried the frustration of being respected by fans, but still boxed into horror roles by the industry itself. Late in life, Todd experienced a surprising creative resurgence through voice acting, conventions, and major game franchises like Marvel's Spider-Man 2. But behind the scenes, his health had already begun collapsing. In 2023, he privately revealed to producers that he was battling terminal stomach cancer while filming Final Destination Bloodlines. During production in early 2024, the filmmakers allowed him to improvise his final speech to audiences, turning the scene into an emotional goodbye that now feels heartbreaking to revisit. His final words about enjoying every second of life suddenly carried terrifying real-world weight after his death. Tony Todd passed away at his home in Marina del Rey, California, on November 6, 2024, at the age of 69 from stomach cancer. He left behind a career spanning horror, science fiction, theater, and video games, with an estimated net worth of around $10 million. In 2026, The Visitor remains one of the most emotional episodes in Star Trek history. And much of that lasting pain comes directly from Tony Todd's unforgettable performance. Bernie Casey as Cal Hudson. Cal Hudson walked into Deep Space Nine carrying the quiet anger of a man who no longer trusted the system he once served. Bernie Casey was 55 years old when he brought real authority and emotional conflict to the Maquis leader, who became one of Commander Sisko's most personal enemies. Long before acting, Bernie Casey was already famous as an NFL player and elite athlete, but Hollywood did not immediately take him seriously once football ended. Many producers saw former athletes as publicity stunts rather than real actors, forcing Casey to fight twice as hard for meaningful roles. Even after landing major films throughout the 1970s and 80s, he often struggled against stereotypes placed on black action stars during that era. Away from cameras, he found peace through painting and poetry, creative passions that many people never realized mattered just as much to him as acting did. In his later years, Casey slowly stepped away from Hollywood and focused more on private artistic work instead of chasing fame. He still made occasional appearances at conventions and film events, but his final years became increasingly quiet compared to the action star image that once defined him. Then in 2017, fans were shocked when news broke that he had suffered a sudden stroke. The health crisis escalated quickly, ending the life of a man who had once seemed physically unstoppable during both his football and acting careers. Bernie Casey passed away on September 19, 2017, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles after complications from a stroke. He died at the age of 78, and left behind a legacy that stretched far beyond sports or science fiction alone. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, Casey is still remembered in 2026 as one of the rare performers who successfully reinvented himself multiple times. Athlete, actor, poet, and painter, all in one lifetime. Colm Meaney as Miles O'Brien. Miles O'Brien always looked exhausted, like the universe had personally chosen him for another miserable day, and somehow that made fans love him even more. Colm Meaney was 39 years old when he brought a rough, working-class Irish realism to Star Trek that felt completely different from the franchise's usual polished heroes. Away from the cameras, Colm sometimes worried that spending too many years inside Star Trek could slowly erase the grounded Irish acting style he grew up with in Dublin theaters. His blunt personality and famously direct attitude occasionally created tension behind the scenes, especially when he strongly disagreed with directors or scripts. His first marriage to actress Barbara Dowling also ended after nearly 2 decades together, closing a major chapter of his life while his television fame continued growing internationally. In later years, Meaney successfully escaped the trap that many science fiction actors struggle with after long-running franchises end. Instead of disappearing into convention nostalgia, he rebuilt himself through darker and more realistic projects like Hell on Wheels and Gangs of London, proving he could still dominate serious drama outside Star Trek. In 2025, his long career received another major milestone when the Irish Film and Television Academy honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, a moment many fans saw as overdue recognition for one of Ireland's most respected actors. As of 2026, Colm Meaney is 73 years old and continues living between Majorca, Dublin, and Los Angeles with his wife Ines Glorian and their family. He remains active in film and television while carrying an estimated net worth of around $10 million. Even now, Miles O'Brien is still remembered as the man Star Trek could never stop torturing, and the actor who made every bit of that pain believable. Nana Visitor as Kira Nerys. Kira Nerys never backed down from a fight, and Nana Visitor gave the former resistance fighter a fierce energy that instantly made her one of Deep Space Nine's strongest characters. At 36 years old, when the series began in 1993, Visitor turned Kira into far more than a typical science fiction officer. She played her like someone carrying years of war, anger, guilt, and survival inside every conversation. That emotional intensity became one of the reasons DS9 felt darker and more human than earlier Star Trek shows. Behind the strength on screen, Nana's real life became deeply complicated during the series. In 1994, she experienced a terrifying traumatic incident after being attacked by two strangers while on her way to work, an experience that reportedly left her struggling with PTSD for years afterward. At the same time, her personal life became tangled with the show itself after she fell in love with co-star Alexander Siddig, who played Dr. Bashir. They married, had a son together during the series, and even incorporated her real pregnancy into the storyline. But the marriage collapsed in 2001, turning later public appearances and memories connected to DS9 into emotionally difficult territory for both actors. As the years passed, Visitor slowly moved away from non-stop television work and focused more on selective projects, conventions, and reflecting on the franchise's legacy. In 2024, she released her book Star Trek, Open a Channel, A Woman's Trek, where she spoke openly about the experiences of women throughout Star Trek history and the pressures female actors faced behind the scenes. The book gave fans a more personal and vulnerable side of someone many only remembered as the fearless Major Kira. As of 2026, Nana Visitor is 69 years old and remains active through interviews, fan conventions, writing projects, and occasional acting appearances. She now lives a much quieter life compared to the chaos of the DS9 years and has an estimated net worth of around $4 million. So many fans still consider Kira Nerys one of the strongest female characters Star Trek ever created, largely because Nana Visitor made her pain feel real. Alexander Siddig as Dr. Julian Bashir. Julian Bashir always sounded like the smartest man in the room, and Alexander Siddig leaned into that confidence so naturally that some viewers genuinely didn't know whether to trust him at first. Only 27 when Deep Space Nine launched in 1993, Siddig brought youthful arrogance, charm, and hidden vulnerability to the station's genetically enhanced doctor, slowly transforming Bashir from an overly eager outsider into one of the series' most emotionally layered characters. Behind the scenes, Siddig often felt caught between worlds. Born in Sudan and raised in Britain, he struggled for years with identity and racism while growing up in 1970s England, later admitting he sometimes tried to hide parts of his heritage just to fit in. During the early seasons of DS9, his character's smug personality reportedly frustrated some writers so much that they intentionally gave Bashir difficult or awkward material to test whether Siddig could handle it. During that time, his personal life also became deeply tied to the series after falling in love with co-star Nana Visitor. The two married, had a son together, then divorced in 2001, turning the end of both the marriage and the show into an emotionally messy chapter. He rarely discussed publicly afterward. As the years passed, Siddig quietly rebuilt himself outside Star Trek through darker and more politically complex roles in projects like Syriana, 24, Peaky Blinders, Gotham, and Game of Thrones. In recent years, he has also become far more open about discussing identity, race, and sexuality than he was earlier in his career. A 2024 interview drew major attention after Siddig candidly described himself as not quite straight, surprising many longtime fans who had only known him through his reserved public image during the DS9 era. As of 2026, Alexander Siddig is 61 years old and continues working steadily in film, television, voice acting, and convention appearances while living primarily in Massachusetts with his wife, Shauna Collier. He remains one of the most internationally recognizable actors to emerge from Deep Space Nine, with an estimated net worth of around $3 million. Avery Brooks as Benjamin Sisko. Benjamin Sisko never needed to raise his voice to command respect. Avery Brooks could silence an entire room with a single stare. At 44 years old, Brooks became the first black lead captain in Star Trek history and brought a level of emotional gravity the franchise had never seen before. Sisko was not just a commander. He was a grieving widower, a spiritual figure, and most importantly, a devoted father, something Brooks fought fiercely to protect on screen. That responsibility became personal very quickly. Brooks was deeply aware of how rarely black fathers were portrayed positively on American television during the 1990s, and he constantly pushed writers to avoid harmful stereotypes. His perfectionism and intense personality sometimes created tension behind the scenes because he approached the role with almost theatrical seriousness, while others treated it more casually. Outside Star Trek, Brooks also carried the pressure of balancing academia, directing, music, and acting all at once, refusing to let Hollywood define him only through science fiction fame. In later years, Brooks slowly stepped away from mainstream Hollywood almost entirely, which led to endless rumors and speculation among fans about his disappearance from acting. But instead of chasing celebrity culture, he focused more on teaching, music, poetry, and selective theater work. His rare public appearances became emotional events for longtime Star Trek audiences because Brooks often spoke philosophically, unpredictably, and deeply personally about art, race, spirituality, and the burden of representation. By the mid-2020s, many fans had begun viewing him less as a television actor and more as a mysterious cultural figure who intentionally chose privacy over fame. As of 2026, Avery Brooks is 78 years old and lives a largely private life with his family while occasionally appearing in interviews, documentaries, and special Star Trek events. He remains a respected educator, musician, and actor with an estimated net worth of around $6 million. So that's the heartbreaking story behind some of the beloved Deep Space Nine actors we sadly lost over the years. While many of them are gone, their performances, voices, and unforgettable moments continue to live on across the galaxy for millions of fans. Which Deep Space Nine actor or character do you miss the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories behind your favorite classic stars.